So I think we have drifted from a time of scientific literacy really into scientific denialism. People simply declare their own truths. Vaccine caused autism, climate change is a hoax, evolution and creationism are equally valid hypotheses. And I think as a consequence, science is starting to lose its rightful place as a source of truth. So I want to talk about sort of how I think it's really important now more than ever for scientists to stand up and explain what they do and why they do it to the public. And there are a number of challenges there, a few of which I'm going to go through today. The first is the challenge of the scientific method. So, for example, in 1998, Andrew Wakefield published a paper in The Lancet claiming that the combination measles, mumps, rubella vaccine caused autism. Now, there were 12 children in this paper. It wasn't a study, it was really just a case series, 8 of whom had autism within a month of receiving the vaccine. I mean, just for those of you who may be epidemiologists in the future, you should always have more study subjects than authors. There were 13 authors in this study, but in any case, the best you could say about this paper was that he raised the hypothesis. Now, in science, the way it works is your hypothesis is the null hypothesis, or said another way, in this case, the MMR vaccine does not cause autism. You can do two things with that null hypothesis. You can reject it, which is to say that when autism follows receipt of the MMR vaccine, it occurs at a level that would be greater than would be expected by chance alone, or you can not reject it, which is to say when autism follows receipt of the MMR vaccine, it occurs at a level that would be expected by chance alone, which is what happened. So there were now, there's sort of 5 studies shown here, another 5 studies shown here. There's been 18 studies in all, showing now that when autism follows receipt of the MMR vaccine, it's at a level that would be expected by chance alone. The 18th study was actually just published within the past couple of weeks. And it was interesting, so some of the people in the media came to me and said, do you think that this is now going to change people's mind? Yeah, that's what we needed. We needed the 18th study. 17 was not nearly enough. But what you can't do is you can't accept the null hypothesis, or said another way, you can never prove never. I mean, epidemiological studies aren't mathematical theorems, there aren't formal proofs. Technically, the researcher can never say the MMR vaccine does not cause autism. I'll give you other examples. I mean, when I was a little boy, I used to watch the television show Superman. That was the one with George Reeves, right? So it was like one of those "How old are you?" questions. So you remember that Superman. As a thing from Christopher Reeve, which probably most of you remember. But in any case, Superman flew. I mean, he put this sort of interlocking thumb grip, which I thought was key to the whole navigational experience, kind of went to the left or he went to the right. I mean, his towel, his cape flew behind him, his hair flew behind him, he looked down at the city. So when you're 5 years old, television doesn't lie. So I went to the backyard and I sort of went on a small chair and put a towel around me and tried with the interlocking thumb grip to fly a few times unsuccessfully. Now that didn't prove I couldn't fly. I mean, I could have done it a million times. That wouldn't have proven I couldn't fly either. It would have made it all the more statistically unlikely. I mean, similarly, you can't prove that there weren't weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. You can only say that they were nowhere that you looked. You can't prove that I've never been to Juneau, Alaska, even though I've never been to Juneau, Alaska. You can only show a series of pictures of buildings in Juneau, Alaska with me not standing next to them. And I think here's the way that plays out in this particular scenario. So in 2002, Dan Burton, who was a Republican from Indiana, who was on the he was the head of the Committee of Government Reform, he held a hearing basically to air his belief that the vaccines cause autism. He believed that his grandson Christian's autism was caused by vaccines. So he had a panel that included Andrew Wakefield to sort of make that case, as well as a number of sort of fringe pediatricians who offered cures for autism. On the other panel were me, as well as epidemiologists, including Colleen Boyle from the CDC, and she was great. I mean, she did, I think, a yeoman's job to the degree that there were, data that were clear at that point to explain what epidemiological studies can and can't do. But what she said was, all the evidence to date doesn't support the hypothesis that at least within the populations that we've looked at, that there is a clear association between vaccines and autism. That's basically what she said, and he got angry. I mean, I don't know if you've ever read the sort of transcript of this meeting. You can't tell how angry he got, but he screamed at her. So he said, you've got an out in the back of this thing. You can't tell me that vaccines don't cause autism because you just don't know, do you? Because she couldn't say, being respectful to the scientific method, the MMR vaccine doesn't cause autism. And so that hurt her. And I think that the lesson here is one shouldn't be verbally handcuffed by the scientific method. I think you should be able to get over it, realize that when you say MMR doesn't cause autism, you're not going to be struck dead by the gods of the scientific method, because vaccines don't cause autism, and I can't fly, at least not without a plane. I think the other thing is, and this is probably the biggest thing, I think trying to get the public to understand and trust the scientific process. So this from Edmund Wilson's Consilience: science is a systematic enterprise of gathering knowledge about the world and condensing that knowledge into testable laws and theories. And the key word here is testable. I mean, you can test whether or not MMR is associated with autism. You can't test how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. That's more of a theological question. That's not going to be answered in a scientific venue. This you can answer. And so what you do is you formulate a hypothesis, you establish burdens of proof, you subject those proofs to statistical analysis. Really, science is the study of controls. In the case of MMR and autism, make sure that both groups are alike in terms of their healthcare-seeking behavior, their socioeconomic background, their medical background. So you can isolate the effect of that one variable, receipt of the MMR vaccine. What it isn't is it isn't scientists or scientific bodies or accumulated knowledge. Scientists are willing to take a textbook and throw it over their shoulder without a backward glance as you get more and more information. I mean, science really is a way of thinking about a problem. It's a way of approaching a problem. I would argue we're all scientists, right? I mean, your radio doesn't work. So you formulate a series of hypotheses. It's not tuned to an active station. The batteries are dead. It's not plugged in. That's scientific thinking. Then you go about testing each of those hypotheses. I mean, you're not going to say, my radio isn't working because I had an argument with my wife this morning. That's not scientific thinking. That's magical thinking. And we actually all engage in it far more than we'd like to believe. So I think the beauty of science is it is enormously self-correcting, which I think is difficult for people. So, for example, in 1926, Johannes Fibiger won the Nobel Prize for his discovery of a worm called Spirocarcinoma as a cause of stomach cancer, even though that was dead wrong. In 1935, Egas Moniz, a Portuguese neurologist, also won the Nobel Prize for his invention of a surgical procedure which he called leucotomy, that he believed could cure a variety of psychiatric illnesses, including schizophrenia. When it crossed the Atlantic Ocean, that name was changed to lobotomy, and we performed 20,000 lobotomies in this country, really up into the 1970s. 7,000 actually were performed by one man, a guy named Walter Jackson Freeman, who was a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, which is where I teach. Similarly, Ansel Keys in 1957 won this cover of Time magazine for his invention of the quote-unquote heart-healthy diet. He believed that saturated fats were bad, unsaturated fats were good, and that therefore butter was bad, driving us into the waiting arms of partially hydrogenated vegetable oils, i.e. margarine, which was loaded with trans fats, and according to the Harvard Harvard Medical School, responsible for about 250,000 cardiovascular-related events and deaths a year, and ultimately caused Time magazine to change their cover. And then these two guys, that's Stanley Pons on the left, Marty Fleischmann on the right, they believe that if you took a palladium wire, inserted into deuterium, which is heavy water, attached it to a battery, that you could get two small nuclei to fuse, forming a larger nucleus, which would then release energy, which was very attractive. This was right around the time of the Exxon Valdez oil spill disaster, and it was sort of served as this clean, limitless source of energy. It was called cold fusion. Good. And it was dead wrong. It should have bothered people that this violated the first law of thermodynamics, which is that you can't get more energy out of something than you put into it, which is why you'll never have a perpetual motion machine. Nonetheless, the media ran with it. So the University of Utah gave $5 million to establish the National Cold Fusion Research Institute, which is a building that still stands on the University of Utah campus. It's just not called that anymore. But I think for many people that fluidity of science can be disconcerting. They hear these stories and they say, see, that's why you can't trust science. And so, for example, it's what I call the Bones-McCoy seduction. Bones-McCoy was the chief medical officer of the USS Enterprise on Star Trek. And so in his hand, there was a tricorder. And if you had a series of signs and symptoms, he would sort of scan you up and down, and he would look at that readout, and that's what you had. And that was very reassuring to know that he knew everything you needed to know. And so we're drawn to the guru. The Mehmet Oz, for example, is the guru. Although why he wears scrubs on this show is still beyond. I mean, Like, did he just get out of surgery? Is he doing surgery? What is it? Or Deepak Chopra, I mean, they don't express doubt. Or Andrew Wakefield, I mean, he also doesn't express doubt. He's convinced that he's right. And although I'm sure if I asked everybody in this audience, do you think we're going to know more about science and medicine 100 years from now than we know now, I think you all would say yes. But when it comes to your disease, you want to believe we know everything we need to know now, and that's not true. So that is disconcerting. I think the lesson here is that truths do win out. It just might take a while. Okay, my last point is I think you need to be willing to leave your comfort zone. There is no group of people that have been better about science than the comedians. I mean, take your pick. Penn and Teller, John Oliver, Samantha Bee, Stephen Colbert have all been great about science. This from George Bernard Shaw, you know, if you're going to tell people the truth, make them laugh, otherwise they'll kill you. And I think that's true here. I mean, my one experience, actually I had a couple experiences on the Colbert Report, but you know, Stephen Colbert, he meets with you before the show, and he says, you know, I play a character. I'm going to stay in character the entire interview. Don't let my character get away with anything. If you do, it's boring. I believe you. I mean, his father was an infectious disease immunology specialist in South Carolina, died when Colbert was only 10 years old in a plane crash, but he is very sympathetic to science. And in this show, he sort of plays the anti-vaccine fool. Just one sort of last point, because my time is coming to an end here, but the one question he asked me, I was fortunate enough to be part of a team at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia that created the bovine human reassortant rotavirus strains that became the vaccine Rotatek, which was licensed in 2006. So the anti-vaccine people often don't like the fact that I am the co-inventor of a vaccine, which makes me, in their eyes, evil. But what he asked me here was, you know, so it's out there. You're in the pocket of the pharmaceutical industry. How do you respond to it? And I said, you know, I'm not in the pocket of or we at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia are not in the pocket of the pharmaceutical industry. If anything, we're in the pocket of children because we do this, this, and this. At which point, 300 people in the studio audience booed. And so I couldn't figure that out. As I was walking out, I asked the associate producer, why did people boo? And she said, you know, people like you don't realize you're on a comedy show, but when you said you were in the pocket of children, it made you sound like a pedophile. So you know, it's like, so my daughter was there, and my daughter was 17 at the time, so we get on the cab, you know, to go back to the train station. This was in New York and going back to Philadelphia. And I said to them at the time, you know, would you ever have thought of that? And my daughter says, yeah, I thought of it, that's why I booed. So I guess my last point here is, I think, to swallow whatever residual pride you have left and in terms of surviving the entrepreneur and get in the game. And the one thing I would say actually to our previous speakers is that you know, you have so many good stories to tell regarding the sort of what we know about the cause and causes of autism. I mean, there really are a lot of good data out there, genetic state, I mean, how one nerve cell communicates with the other. And although I think the anti-vaccine people no longer take this story hostage, I think they really are fading, I think, in many ways. But I do think that as an example, in the 1800s, nobody knew what caused type 1 diabetes. So there was all these crazy sort of cures and crazy causes. There's a book by Chris Feutner called Bittersweet that goes through this. And then in 1921, Banting and Best discovered insulin, and all of that disappeared. I think we're close enough now to at least knowing about sort of what the cause and causes of autism are and things that may be of benefit, that it would be great to have those stories out there in mainstream media to defeat a lot of this sort of craziness that surrounds this disorder. Thank you.